Whether your team is still learning to trust each other or you're light years ahead and ready to master accountability, we've got a training that fits. At Big Self School, we offer 2-hour, 4-hour, and all-day workshops on communication, burnout recovery, and team well-being. You'll get Chad and/or Shelley, TEDx speakers, experienced practitioners, and co-founders as your trainers. Plus, every workshop includes access to the Emma Team Communication app for powerful pre-work and post-training integration. New team members? They can take the Enneagram and 360 feedback tools at any time. The whole experience is tailored to your needs, and it starts by reaching out through the link in the show notes.
Hello and welcome back to Leading Human, where we explore how to stay awake, creative, and grounded in a world that's automating everything, maybe even us. I hope not. I'm your host, Chad Prevost, and a co-founder of Big Self School. Today we're talking about, well, I'd like to think that we are not talking about collapse. Not exactly. We're talking about something sneakier than outright collapse of our culture. But we are talking about cultural stagnation. Yeah, wrap your mind around that for a minute. You know, last episode, don't know if you caught it or not, but I was talking about how I just recently finished a 1952 novel by Kurt Vonnegut called Player Piano, a novel about a society where machines had replaced nearly all human labor. But he wasn't warning us about annihilation. He was warning us about, you could say, boredom, about meaninglessness, about a world that no longer needed us, at least in the way that we think about how much the world really does need us, and maybe how we need each other, how we need to have something to do to feel a sense of connection, a sense of identity, and not only like through the physical things we do, but of course, importantly, spiritually, or maybe in between the two, psychologically. Here we are in 2025, and unlike what the enthusiasts of the internet were saying in 1998, there are no fireballs in the sky, no collapsing cities. No Armageddon, no dystopian reality. But something in the culture feels flat, kind of stuck. So today's episode asks, are we living through a cultural collapse, or just in the boring part, maybe before the story gets good again? So let's start with a little historical context. If you study history, you'll notice something surprising. Total collapse is rare. Sort of like The Road by Cormac McCarthy, that moment there where whatever is exactly happening or why it's happening, that is rare. What's far more common is stagnation. And you can think about entire dynasties, Egyptian, Chinese, even European monarchies went for decades, sometimes centuries, without meaningful cultural change. Same art, same stories, same caste systems, maybe economic systems. And in fact, many of these societies celebrated their lack of innovation. And in fact, change was seen as dangerous. Stability, even at the cost of creativity, was certainly the goal. In fact, I would say probably more often than not, this was the case. Rarely has there been a culture such as ours that prides itself on innovation. So historians will often describe these periods as times of relative stability. But let's be honest, that usually means nothing much happened. And that might sound pretty comforting about right now. Like if you were a goat herder in Mongolia in 1000 AD, you could rest assured that your offspring would be doing what you were doing. And there's comfort in that. So not much was happening for long periods of time. And this is a form of comfort. I mean, compare that to the insidious, the intense ways that we barely have defined many of the roles and the occupations that we can have before they disappear. And there's other different kinds of jobs that sort of materialize. Because we're growing up in a whirlwind. There have been, I mean, we love there's been decades of musical revolutions. There's been cinematic innovation over the past 100 years. It's amazing where we've come with that. There, obviously, really recently, there's been all these digital media booms. But all of the newness, all of the original, like we're not in a time of that, are we? We're in a time of continuing to process and regurgitate and recreate that which has been innovated already. Not to glorify or romanticize the 60s, but just thinking about the innovations of music in the 60s and how it was emerging, and how, whatever you think of the Beatles, how they almost redefined themselves with every one of their 8 albums. And then to compare that even in the 80s to a band like REM, who was I would say that in terms of a band who really valued and lived out the value of originality, REM really sought to be original with Michael Stipe's word salad, sometimes lyrics, and the way that Mike Mills, the bassist, and Peter Buck, the guitarist, would talk about not creating the same set of chord sequences twice. Apparently, they only once ever did a 1-4-5 chord progression, which is the most common and potentially satisfying to the ear. And even for all of that originality and seeking to be original from a band like REM, they still would point to the Beatles as being the true innovators. And that's just to context, and like, look where we are now, right? Where it's hard to find the original music. Let's just put it that way. It's kind of getting automated. And it feels like there's not a lot of life out there right now in the culture, especially say in the arts. And we're exploring this right now on Leading Human, because we don't just talk about the same boring subjects. We're trying to talk about what is actually going on and interesting, and maybe something that is a little more original that you can't just get it at any other in any other format when you're looking for sources and being informed, hopefully slightly entertained at the same time. But look at Hollywood, right? You already know the pattern: sequels, prequels, reboots, spin-offs, remakes. The entire industry runs on recycling, and not the good kind of recycling. And my kids have grown up in this, and they you try to make the most of it, right? You're like, oh, this prequel is really like cool. It was like, yeah, but it had to be attached to something else that was original, right? And I guess it's because originality is risky and familiarity is safe. And so studios pursue deliberate stagnation. That's their business model. Like, I guess anyone in power wants, whether they would call it stagnation, they want status quo. And the same thing's happening in music. The biggest new hits sound a lot like the biggest old hits. And labels, now invest more in publishing rights for 30-year-old songs than they do in young artists. Books, same thing. I've lived it. I've been in the industry. You see the same tropes, the same formulas. Everything's got a franchise mindset. Everything is optimized for predictability. I mean, it's like you almost just give in and just say, okay, so if I write in a genre, then I have a built-in audience, because everyone just wants to read this genre, right? The very thought of trying to write something literary, like, right? Well, is that, you mean plotless and like obscure language? Okay. But anyway, I digress. It's a failure of creativity. And to me, in a similar way, it can be a failure of courage. But while painting this bleak reality, right? Here's the thing: real creativity hasn't gone anywhere. It's just moved underground. Sometimes underground online, like indie musicians. Ted Gioia, the cultural critic and jazz musician. If you haven't heard of Ted Gioia, he speaks to these things very richly. He's an amazing thinker. And he will tell you about how indie musicians are, they're releasing wildly inventive work on Bandcamp, SoundCloud. Writers are breaking through on Substack, even though that's also very crowded. But at least the models, there are some models. There is Substack. There are creators that are thriving on YouTube, TikTok, Patreon, and other digital platforms that bypass the gatekeepers. So there still are these little ways to bypass the gatekeepers. You no longer need, this is good too, right? You no longer need a record deal or a publishing contract or a film studio's blessing to share your work. That Berlin Wall of culture has fallen. And yeah, while the platforms are stacked and noisy, and it's hard to stand out, that the noise can be a good sign. It means something's alive down there. And to bring it back to Vonnegut for a minute, he imagined a world where all meaning had been mechanized out of existence in player piano. that 1952 novel. But here we are. We are pushing back. We are pushing out. We are creating in the cracks. So it's not a dystopian novel or experience that we're living out here. There is hope, but of course, it's not a perfect story. For instance, I guess even these platforms the platforms do run on algorithms, and algorithms don't reward risk. They reward what's familiar, what has already worked, what's already viral, and that's how they're basing their computer models on. So even in the supposedly open creative landscape, newness still struggles to rise. And unfortunately, the most innovative voices often get buried under a mountain of trends and mimicry. I just think I was recently talking to a friend who I worked with who is a project manager, but he does a whole lot of things. He creates a lot of content and he helps others promote their content in a lot of ways. And he was like, the days of you thinking you can go organic with your content and really grow your platform, they're over. And you all wouldn't believe how many different solicitations I get. I mean, I would just say on a weekly basis, I get some other different promoter who won't take no for an answer and will solicit me 3 to 5 times. It seems to be what they do about how. Then they'll highlight all these ways on YouTube or different things I'm doing that are, failing it with my numbers. And if I just, use their paid services, they will help me reach an even bigger audience. And so, I mean, this is true stuff. It's, I lost track a little bit thinking about it. And also, by the way, while public service announcement, I guess, while I'm talking about it, also, we get solicited by people asking to be guests on the show. And right now, we're not looking for other coaches. We're not looking for other authors to have conversations with. Maybe we will, like as the cycle swings, we will revisit those conversations, those types of strategies for creating an interesting podcast. But for you guys listening, for the audience here, whether I'm with Shelley or whether I'm holding it down on a single idea, we're simply trying to bring to you what is different in this regard and what is a single idea that we are going to explore and how I can do it lightly and without a lot of scheduling and other editing and other expectations of promotion and things. So let's bring it back briefly to just let's pick back up on player piano as we're talking about some of these ideas. In the book, sorry about the ding, I can't mute that while recording because then it mutes my microphone. Anyway, I doubt that'll get edited out. I don't know. In the book of Player Piano, one character says something that stuck with me. I wish I could be alive 100 years from now to enjoy the world we're building, but not now in the time of transition. And that feels true to me in 2025. I mean, I've had the thought where I'm talking to an AI enthusiast or something, or we'll hear some of this discussion about how jobs are going away really quickly, but don't worry. we're all going to be on UBI and we're going to be living in this wonderful world where the only challenge you're going to have is to figure out what to do with your time, which honestly, to me, that does sound wonderful because I have lots of ways that I do, I guess, independently create meaning from, whether it's been writing poetry, writing books, playing, mountain biking, disc golfing, lots of ways to just being with people, having good conversations over coffee, hanging out, camping. There's a lot of ways to recreate and have fun and to not have to be a worker bee and to not have to always be aligning my purpose and meaning with like the marketplace, like capitalistic agenda that I'm also fulfilling. Or like the work to do, like for it to just be volunteer to help others because you want to. I mean, this could be quite a great, wonderful reality. But meanwhile, right back at the ranch in real time, jobs by the thousands are getting cut, some quietly, some with big media headlines, if it gets leaked, I guess. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, you still have to be paying your mortgage, and you still have to be able to get the mortgage, and you still have to pay for your bills and your groceries and your student loans, even while these jobs are shrinking. I don't know. And we've got AI encroaching on creative and cognitive work. Entire industries are stuck in loops, and we've got creators fighting for oxygen. I can only imagine how the graphic designers of the world feel. But here's why I'm not in despair. There is, as Ted Gioia has outlined, a 5-step pattern to cultural change that is, if you synthesize this from many different cultural critiques and observations of history, it goes like this. A trend begins. Step number 1, a trend begins. 2, it then accelerates. 3, it goes too far. 4, people get sick of it. And then 5, finally, something new breaks through. And it does seem that we're at step 4. We're sick of it. The sameness, the sameness of everything, the automation of your pitch and this frequency, your BPMs, the soul-sucking sameness. And that disgust and that fatigue is a sign that a reversal is coming. So, no, I don't think we are in cultural collapse. I do think we're in a dangerous in-between. A space where meaning is harder to find and where machines feel more vivid sometimes than people. Like that movie Her from 2014 with Joaquin Phoenix, where he falls in love with basically his chat assist. And like in this world, we're sick of it where sameness feels safer than soulfulness. So I think we're close. Depends on how unsatisfied we are, to something breaking through, and not because the big companies are going to lead the way, unfortunately, but because this is the kind of thing that does come from the grassroots. Now, we will say a lot of times in organizational constructs where we're asked to do trainings to address some kind of communication dysfunction within an organization. Not always. Sometimes it's very high level, and hey, we just want to we want to understand ourselves better and how to communicate better. And there's all this aspiration, but there isn't like a specific thing that they're trying to address. But anyway, a lot of times we are asked to do that, and of course, I would say more than 9 times out of 10, maybe not 10 out of 10, but even more than 9 out of 10. It's more of a top-down thing, and if leadership can recognize that difficult truth that they need to foster the change they want to see, it usually does work that way in smaller organizations, even larger organizations. But when it comes to a big cultural change, don't expect that change coming from the top down. Expect it to rise from below. So, and I think that will come maybe from our artists and our writers and our musicians and just our independent thinkers and people willing to do things differently. So if there was a takeaway for what you can do, other than, starting with yourself, but you could support indie voices and you can share the things that move you and, make something weird and beautiful, even if no one sees it. And that's a message to myself as well, because there have been a lot of times where I feel discouraged if there's not much of an audience for the things that I'm making. I go, well, what's the point? So stagnation is real, but so is the spark. And it only takes a spark to get a fire going, as that song from the 70s goes. So thanks for listening to Leading Human. And if today's episode resonated, share it with someone who needs a little fire. And you can tag me on LinkedIn or Instagram, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts to help more people find this show organically. And remember, the machines may be learning fast, but humanity still undefeated. See you next time.